Hi there. Welcome to the panel today. I'm very excited to see all of you in the audience. I am Carla Schultz, and I am a Michigan farmer and United Soybean Director. And I am very excited to introduce you to our panel today. I'm actually a Michigan farmer that raises soybeans, corn, black beans, wheat, cattle, hogs, and hay. So we are a very diversified operation in Michigan, and we have a lot going on. If you ever need extra work, come onto our farm. We have plenty of jobs that usually need to be done. So today you might find it very interesting, right? That I'm a farmer up on stage with three very amazing and intelligent people, and you might ask yourself, well, what would a farmer be doing on stage, right? But I can tell you it makes perfect sense to have a farmer here with product innovators. And that's because today we're going to be talking about using soybean as a base in many of the products that you might see on the retail shelf. And we need that full circle. So today we're going to have a conversation around that whole system and how that works. So I'm pleased to introduce you to today's experts on the panel. We have Ann Lee Jeffs, an activator focused on promoting and advancing sustainability across the globe at organizations including the Sustainability Collaborative. Okay, this is a big one. I told her this before, so hold your hats for this one. American Chemical Society Green Chemical Institute's Biotechnology Leadership Roundtable. Phew. And Healthcare Plastic Recycling Council. Anne has more than 30 years of sustainability experience working for multinationals, including Modern Meadow, Teva Pharmaceuticals, Johnson & Johnson, Honeywell, Colgate-Palmolive, and Pfizer. Welcome, Anne. Thanks for today. Next is Christoph Krumm, the CEO and co-founder of Ceronics Renewables, where he works to develop new, greener, safer, and more effective ingredients for personal care and cleaning products. He was selected as an American Institute of Chemical Engineers Top 35 Under 35 for innovation for his efforts, and has raised over $8 million in grant and equity funding to help commercialize Ceronics' Renewables' new eco-friendly cleaning product ingredients. Welcome, Christoph. And finally, I'm pleased to welcome Kendra Bracken-Ferguson, founder and CEO of BrainTrust, a global brand marketing firm, BrainTrust Founders Studio, the largest membership-based platform dedicated to Black beauty and wellness founders, and a general partner in the adjacent BrainTrust Fund. A noted and transformative brand builder, Kendra has the distinction of being one of the first 200 Black women to have raised more than $1 million in investment for her debut company. She hosts the Business of the Beat podcast, offering business insights from diverse executives. And this is pretty exciting. She has her first book that debuted, and you can buy now, The Beauty of Success. Thanks, Kendra. So I'm first going to start with a very big picture question. And when I actually was thinking about this question, it was actually tough for me to wrap my head around because it is such a big question. But I know the panelists up here will have no problem explaining and giving a great answer to this. So to the three of you, how have you seen sustainability in beauty, fashion, and wellness industries evolve over the past 10 to 15 years in response to increasing demand for real response to climate shift? And what do you think is next? So I'll let whoever would like to start off. Anne.
Yeah, I'll start. Yeah, so, I have about 30 years of experience working for multinationals like Johnson & Johnson and Colgate-Palmolive and Pfizer, and all companies were into the beauty and wellness and personal care. And the evolution that's taking place is that, back in a couple of decades ago, it was really readily available and accessible, more petrochemical-based, animal-based products, inputs that were used to make, innovate, products and services, and over the course of time, the realization that the impact is coming from the supply chain. So 90% plus impact of climate change, biodiversity, and land use is coming from your suppliers. And the recognition of that led companies to really engage with their supply chain, with the suppliers, not so much farmers. And now, today, with recognized challenges of planetary health issues, climate change, biodiversity, water scarcity, now companies are innovating in the beauty and wellness and personal care products in the context of renewables, in terms of your carbon sources don't need to be coming from fossil fuel, but it can be from renewable source like the soybean. So I think it's really the companies are now challenged with looking at the ingredients that are going into the products to innovate from the perspective of the challenges that we have.
I love that. And I know as a U.S. farmer and as a U.S. soy director, we want to be part of that transformation. Christoph, do you have an answer to that?
Teeing off of that, I think one thing coming kind of from the other side of working at a startup that's developing plant-based and bio-based ingredients for these types of products, the supply chain component of this is really critical. And I think 10 years ago, when we look back, we say, oh well, people were just maybe paying lip service to sustainability, and maybe that was to some extent true. But I think the bigger challenge is that people didn't know where to start with a lot of this, and it takes a really, really long time to build this collaborative supply chain, to understand, what is my supplier doing, and how does my sustainability criteria tie in with that, and also for those companies to really define what is sustainability. And I think finally we're now getting to a point where companies are coming out with real sustainability metrics and goals that can be worked towards and achieved, rather than this sort of greenwashed, here we want to be greener approach. And that's taken a really long time, but I think it's also because it's just really difficult for everyone across the supply chain to understand what are the inputs and outputs, and where does that fit in with what we do.
And I think that's a good point. It takes time. I know we were talking about this behind stage, and because Christoph has a startup business, it's taken you maybe more time than you even thought, correct?
Absolutely.
Yes. So if you're out there in the audience too, and you're thinking, wow, I thought this would go much faster, that process can sometimes take many more years than you would think.
Sustainability is hard, right? We're moving molecules, right? We're doing real tangible things that have a carbon impact, and that doesn't happen overnight. So yeah, it requires that long vision and a lot of collaboration to get there.
And I love that you mentioned, what is sustainability? It's been really hard to define. And I remember even 10 years going to organizational meetings, and they would ask us as farmers, what does sustainability mean to you? And we would all have different answers. I mean, so it's everywhere in society, it hits home, but I think you're right. There are some metrics now that we're, as companies out there that are standardizing certain ways to measure it quantitatively, so they have something that they can bring to consumers.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting too, because from two perspectives, right? From the product perspective, the retailer perspective, that as you were talking, in my industry, of course, we're looking at not just the products, but where are we selling the products to? And the standards that are happening, you look at a Sephora, you look at a Target, you look at an Ulta, who very much now are requiring different components of sustainability to be on the shelves in retailers. And so it's the supply chain, it's the ingredients, it's the products, it's the retailers. And the other thing, when we think about, in particular, beauty, wellness, like now, all of the founders that we work with, there has to be some type of sustainable component, right? Now, the definition is where it gets a little fuzzy. But when we think about clean, we think about non-toxic, we think about vegan, we think about all these things, it's table stakes. Like, even the founders who are starting companies now, they know that in order to truly be competitive, to get on shelf, they have to think about sustainability differently. differently. And it's funny because even in my own home, I'm saying to my husband, I'm like, I'm so embarrassed. I'm in beauty and wellness. And I was looking at this product that he uses, his dad uses, his granddad uses. And I started reading the ingredients and I said, if this were to get in your eye, you might go blind. What are we doing? And so, but even the awareness, for him, then telling his friends, and that's what's going to happen down to my daughter who looks at ingredients and she's 9. And so it is table stakes from a beauty perspective to make sure that your ingredients are truly something that you can put on your skin, that you can ingest, and then bringing that into retail.
Yeah, I like that point a lot. Sometimes we forget, well, as farmers, we're growing that base product, and there's this whole system. And I love that you mentioned, Lyndall, that end on the shelf product. And what does it have in it? And what are the ingredients? And people are paying attention to that even more as well. And so it's like, why not work more bio-based materials into that, like a soybean, which I think would be just a great collaboration as we move forward. So this next question really does kind of segue into what we're talking about. And Christoph mentioned this in his answer, and it has to do with some greenwashing. And I know, like, when I walk into a store, you mentioned Target, Sephora, right? There are so many choices. And sometimes I almost wish there'd be 2 choices, even though it is nice to have so many products on the market, because it's just so tough, right? What do we choose? You're reading the ingredient label. What does that even mean? And I know Christoph wanted to understand this. He's the scientist behind much of it. But a lot of us aren't molecular scientists, and we don't understand what sometimes the names of those ingredients really stand for. So in today's world, how real is the business need for brands to take sustainability serious? And what is needed most for brands to take the right steps to avoid greenwashing, green hushing, and green bleaching, right? Words that pretty much mean the same thing. Would one of you like to answer?
I can start this time. So, from my perspective, developing a green technology, we interface with a lot of consumer packaged goods companies. We, have to work with them not only in a does it work capacity, but also in is it sustainable capacity. And going back to what Kendra was saying, sustainability has moved from an afterthought into a prerequisite at this point. And it's no longer we're doing the same thing but trying to make it more sustainable. We have these clear sustainability metrics, and we're going to figure out how we do what we do within those constraints. Like, that is a very clear shift that has happened. And when that shift happens, companies really understand what sustainability means to them and how to achieve it. And so when you think about how do we get a beauty care product to market, you have to think all the way from the soybean, for example, all the way to the end product, and you have to really consider every life cycle metric along that. So, as a company, we do life cycle analyses, and we measure the greenhouse gas impacts and sort of all the other metrics that go in with that sustainability, and we tie that into what we call cradle to gate, basically from when the ingredient is born to when it leaves the gate of our company and goes into a product. And that gets put into bigger models, and those bigger models then define sustainability. They define the greenhouse gas impact of the bottle of shampoo that's sitting in your shower. And only when we get to that level of definition can we truly say, does this bottle of shampoo fit the sustainability goals of this company? And again, that goes back to, it's really hard to do that. So, there's been a big shift, but I think the biggest shift has just been that there's much more data being generated, people are serious about it, and kind of it feels like there's finally some traction behind all of this.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I know even on our farms, measuring data on our own farms is very important. So it's even starting like at the farm level. And sometimes there's those fine lines, but we see the validity of it in some aspects as well. So it's us as farmers doing our part, which we try to do, right? I think we all try to do our best in what we're doing, no matter what. But sometimes it can be difficult. You're very right to continue to have that data available and then actually put it into metrics. So
I think it's interesting because from both of what you're saying, like we talk a lot about transparency and traceability. And so thinking back, from the farm, a lot of founders that I talk to, it's like, what's the traceability of the ingredients so that we can track it along the way, knowing that there may be some variances, and then being very transparent, because it is hard. Like when you think about companies, P&G, and to your experience, that have been around for all this time, it is hard to change that cycle. And so we have this opportunity now that if we can trace back to the source, we can track it, and we can be transparent with our customers, even if it's not 100%, which I'll look to you all about what is really 100% when it comes to products. But I think that that's the biggest thing. If we can substitute one ingredient for a new ingredient that is sustainable, if we can trace it back to the origins as much as we can, and then if we can educate our consumers, then I think that those are the key pieces. I'm like, we may not be able to solve it all right now because there are issues that we cannot control. There's also cost. You know, when we think about some of these brands that are starting, the cost to be 100% end-to-end may be a detriment to their business. So how can we take the steps to do better, trace it back to the source, and then be transparent about what is there and how we've done better than what we were before, even if we haven't gotten to the end goal? And to me, I think that's the step that moves us along.
I think that's an awesome point, Anna, and I'll let you get to this. Sorry, I did not mean to interject. But it is cost, right? Because our time has value. So I've been thinking as farmers, you're right. You want to they'd like us to collect data for different companies, but part of us is like, well, is there a value to this? You know, what am I going to get out of it? Yes, I want to do the best I can for my farm, for the world itself, for my community. At the end of the day, though, my time has value too. And if that's adding extra time into my day, how can we make it work for everyone involved?
Yeah, so great points. And I had a privilege of working for a startup called Modern Meadow. And Modern Meadow uses soy in the formulation that is used to make alternative leather, suede, and materials. And great thing about soy is you can trace back all the way to the farmers and show the efficiencies in the water reduction, waste reduction, and so forth. And as a startup studying with the sustainability as a DNA, it's embedded in from the innovation to the market. It's really integrated. And when I look back, compare that to Johnson & Johnson and Colgate and Pfizer, the challenge of big companies in terms of traceability and transparency is the work is still done in a linear way. It's not circular in terms of procurement buys materials, right? And they're basing a lot of decision on the dollars, the cost, and not necessarily their priorities, transparency and traceability. And it's really the sustainability group that are pushing that across all the functions. And we are in a better place because now the environmental sustainability, ESG, social sustainability and governance sustainability, they're regulated now, especially in Europe. And U.S. is kind of getting there state by state. California passed a law to have public companies to disclose their scope 1, 2, and 3, and now there's lawsuits. So I think we have a long way to go. But I think what's really real is when you work with organizations like United Soybean Board and look at soy in terms of you can trace back and you can be transparent about where the ingredients are coming from. And that's becoming so critical, and it's required by law now in Europe.
And I like that as we talk about innovation. We talk about these new products, tracing it back to the soybean. And I did this for a podcast, but I'm going to take you back to 4th grade for a second. I know maybe many of you don't want to go back to 4th grade. Sorry. As you sat there, made me listen to your history teacher. I'll never forget when I listened and I heard about George Washington Carver. And at the time, I didn't really think much about it, but he was a scientist really in the South, and he was able, I believe, to divide the protein and the oil on a soybean. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Christoph. I got that wrong. Maybe I wasn't paying attention enough in 4th grade. But he just tipped the iceberg because he was able to invent so many new products from the soybean. And I kind of look at historical figures and think, we still have so much that we can create, right? And as farmers, we want to create more soybeans with less inputs, be more efficient with what we're doing, and be more sustainable as we're talking about what we're doing on our farm. Because I didn't mention this, I have 4 children, right? We want our farms to continue as well. And that means taking care of what we grow and taking care of our community. But with that is also thinking, what can soybeans be made into? And the 3 panelists up here are awesome examples that they have at the startup level, at the sustainability level, and at the store level. So as industry leaders, what role do you see innovation, research, and development playing to enable consumers to live their lives while also reducing impact to the planet?
I just want to shout out because you were talking about it. I don't want to embarrass Tracy, but Tracy, please stand up and walk to the middle. Because when we think about innovation, like Tracy is wearing pants made out of soybeans and they feel good, they're gorgeous. And I think that there was this stigma, right? Thank you, Tracy. But I think that it actually goes to the innovation and it goes to the research because I've had conversations with people where it's like fashion can't look that good or beauty products won't work. They're not going to be the conversations that we have over and over again with our friends and family that if it doesn't have a smell, if it doesn't have, bleach, then it's not cleaning. Or if it doesn't have this type of ingredient, it's not going to be effective from your deodorant to your color cosmetics. And I think so much of that is the innovation in terms of what you're doing and the science and sitting on the boards because that's not the case. And so we have to educate people that you can do the right thing while still getting something that is going to stay, that's going to make you look good, but it's also going to be good for the environment. And that comes from innovating in our research, innovating in how we share, innovating in the education, innovating in the conversations, having this even be part of South by and the work that the U.S. soybean trade did to get this happening is where we all have to support, we have to talk about it so that we can continue to educate.
I want to give a plug to Model Meadow. Tracy's wearing actually a Model Meadow technology. In context of scalability and innovation. So innovation and Model Meadow, taking, a soy that's good for you, that looks good on you, it's, soy chemistry, green chemistry, and they use that to create. So they take also the recycled resin from tires and carpets, and they infuse soy mixed with bio-based polyurethane, bio-based polymer, and transform that into the leather and suede and also textile that's better than anything that's out there, and color fastness. So one of the things Model Meadow is doing is going into mobility sector to really get, the EVs who are interested in just using non-animal hide material to be using Model Meadow hide and not hide, the alternative to leather. So it's a scalability. So it's a drop-in. So we're Model Meadow is working with tanneries. So they don't just have to tan animal hide. They can tan this dry white that's made out of recycled tires. That with the soy, and they can also be involved with the transition to the sustainability, to be more circular. So the scalability is really critical. I mean, I think consumers are willing to pay a little bit more for sustainability, but not. It can't really be double or triple, right? So it has to make sense, and drop-in is so critical in terms of having a technology innovation that can drop in, and the education is a big portion of it because supply chain today is based on linear economy, so it's really not created to use input from waste or plant-based materials. So education, not just consumers, but also education from elementary school and up is critical part of that journey.
And I like that I don't know if it was meant, but actually the slide has that circular shape around the pictures, and there are some innovative products on the slide that you may see up there. And it is interesting to see what soybeans can be made into. And that was my point, I guess, with the fourth grade story too. Soybeans are such a versatile crop, and they can be in so many sectors of industry, whether it's actually human food or animal feed or plastics or adhesive industrial glues, or we have apparel, beauty, and you can see up there lip gloss, right, candles. But I just think it's amazing all the uses that soybean can be made into.
Yeah, I think one of the things that has stood out from this discussion is really coming from an innovation standpoint. Developing these types of ingredients and technologies requires kind of a new approach. Green and renewable technologies are inherently different from petrochemicals and fossil fuels. And so actually, back when I was a grad student, still working on this technology that we ultimately spun out as Ceronics Renewables, we actually set out to make some of the same ingredients that are used in laundry detergents and personal care products, the exact same molecule that you would get from petroleum, but we wanted to make it from plants instead. It turns out that was like a 5-step process. You went through all this energy-intensive processing, only to arrive at something that was exactly the same as what was out there today and cost more. So you're kind of losing right from the get-go. It turned out, though, and this is what ultimately turned into Ceronics Renewables, was if we take plant-based raw materials like soybean oil, for example, we combine those with another circular egg waste product, and if we went through a 2-step process, you actually got something that kind of looked like that other ingredient that we were trying to make, but it removed 3 steps from the process. Turns out it costs roughly the same as the petroleum-based product, and it worked way better. And so that's kind of the inspiration, right? It had really great performance in cold water and hard water, and it was super mild on skin, and all of these differentiating factors that ultimately led us to want to create a company from this and build out this technology. They're all inherently based on the natural structure of the ingredients. So rather than trying to force something through the systems that exist for petroleum, we said, let's rethink this entirely. And I think, Modern Meadow is another great example of that. Like, why try to create, the same product at a higher cost, for example, and instead just use something that, inherently comes from plants?
So I find that so interesting. I know in our household, and this is actually one of the questions up here today, in our household we use a bio-based cleaning line, and it grew out of, because it's actually made from soybeans, which is great. At the same time, that's not why I fully use it the first to begin with. There's one company, and it's probably in American households across the U.S. It just would always give off a bad odor. It cleans really well, but I just couldn't stand it. And I actually switched over to the clean line we use now, and I love it. There's no off odor. It's an impeccable cleaning solution, and it makes your skin feel good. It was like a win on all sides. And so, the question is, I think there's some fallacy out there with believing that if you give up something, you're going to lose something else, in that petrochemical line, and that's not true, which you just validated as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I can just add on that a little bit. I think that may have been true in the past. There certainly have been instances where I've used an eco-friendly version of something. You're like, okay, I'm going to pay $7 instead of $5 for this. I'm going to be good for the environment. You go home, you try it out, and it just doesn't clean. And that's frustrating to a consumer, right? I mean, you just paid more money. You said, I'm going to do good by the environment, and now you ended up just wasting something that's going to go down the drain, and you're going to throw away more plastics, and you feel worse about it in the end. So, I mean, yeah, I truly feel this, because this is exactly like this uphill battle that renewables and bio-based products are facing. But it's also, like I said, a massive opportunity to say, let's rethink this and actually deliver and drive performance with these ingredients that we're making. It's not just a sustainability thing. It's sustainability and new technologies actually bring about all these other performance benefits that we can offer to product brands and consumers ultimately.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear you talk about that because we were just talking to a founder who's using glass jars, and the whole point was we're trying to be sustainable, and people have been dropping them in their showers, and so the glass has been shattering, and the founder's devastated, and so a lot of the conversation has been you're doing everything that you can, the products, the ingredients, but the glass is not working. And so now partnering to figure out what's the version of plastics that can be sustainable where we can still continue to have this product. And so it's a cost piece. So it's like when you look at the cost per unit or the unit economics of doing glass jars for a product, you're automatically have gone up. And so how do we take that, but then navigate it based upon what we're seeing, the advancements in plastics and packaging, and still be able to create a sustainable product that's going to deliver that you've got the ingredients. Let's look at packaging, and then let's look at how do we make sure that we can still reinforce it. But then we have this customer issue of I wanted glass, but now I'm hurt. So it's interesting.
That is such a good point because you're right. People they see a plastic and they associate it with a petroleum-based product, right? Right off the bat. And that's almost like has to be a mind shift, right? A whole market shift to like make sure people know like there are plastics that can be made with different commodities, different crops that are grown on farms. So, and I know Anne mentioned this before, and this brings it up as well. I thought about that. I wore many different hats, but I was able to be a regional educator for a Farm Bureau Science Lab, where we went to individual schools and we would teach agricultural lessons to students. And it was super cool because everything was hands-on. So we had them do an experiment. And one of those was like your crayon, right? The crayons that most kids use are petroleum-based, which is okay. We showed them a soy-based crayon. And it was the whole conversation about renewable resources. And they make petroleum-based crayons color really well, but so do soy-based crayons. But it's like a petroleum-based product is non-renewable. And petroleum can be really great, but are we using it on the products that it really needs to be used on? Something that you use every day, like a plastic jar, a crayon. And so how can we offset that cost too in the end? Yeah. So Anne, I have an individual question for you. You've worked at a number of large brands and with big brand innovators. Innovation is so exciting, but one thing that likely a major challenge would be the scalability or the speed, right, that you bring a product to market. Can you talk a little bit about that? The importance of scalability innovation, and is this one of the bigger challenges that brands are facing right now?
Yeah, so I think scalability is critical for success for innovation to come to market, and I think it was, as Christoph said, it used to be a huge challenge in the past. Maybe even a decade ago, to find innovation that's bio-based, animal-free, that could be scaled up. And today, the innovations are out there, and they are scalable. But it's more of, I think, brand adaptation, right? Brands. So I don't know if you guys were following Renewcell. Renewcell, they do fiber-to-fiber recycling in Sweden. They have a capacity of 60,000 tons. Brands have committed, they had the term sheets committed to buying certain capacity, but they didn't follow through. So I think, and a lot of this probably, cost related. So I think as far as the sustainability today, I'm very pleased and happy to say, and I would love to have you guys, my panelists, to chime in. But innovation, sustainable innovation is out there. That's right. That's plant-based, animal-free, and also support circularity, like Madam Meadow, BioVera. But in terms of there's still a hesitancy from the brands. I think consumers are now looking for that, especially in beauty and personal care. There's a lot of like small brands are now coming up, and really. really, right, challenging the big names, P&G, Unilever, and such. So they're rising up. So consumers want that. I think also not just with the brands, but also the investments. Investments are not right. There's a lot of challenges last year. I think this year it's going to get a little better, but it's going to get better. But in terms of investments are not flowing into the next gen innovation that involves with soy and other renewable. So that's also challenging. But I think that sustainable innovation today are largely scalable. You can get carbon that's from renewable resource like soy. You can get carbon from waste resource, right? From waste plastic, like what Bottom Meadows, using in terms of from resin from recycled tire. It's really activating the circularity and really activating the investment community. And also the big challenge is policy and regulations, right? Why do we have EV adoption in a big way, right? US, they're saying 50% of the cars sold by 2035 will be EV. In the EU, it's be 100%. It's because incentives, right? So we need incentive to have companies get the innovation that's based on that's plant-based like soy into the market faster, and we need funding, we need brands to really, support that.
Yeah. Any thoughts by Christoph and Kendra on scalability?
Yeah, just briefly. I mean, I think scalability is huge to us developing a chemical technology. We can't win unless we're at scale, because that's where our unit economics work out. And that's true for so many other sustainable innovations, and we kind of all need to win together in order for that to work out. If you think about it, like Anne was saying, we're going up against decades of process optimization that's gone into petrochemicals to make them super, super cheap, including subsidies that go on top of those petrochemicals. That's a massive challenge, and I know that we can get there, but it does take buy-in from every level of stakeholder. It takes innovation in the pipeline, which we have now, and it takes kind of that commitment from companies to say, all right, we're just going to do this now. And if we do it and you do it, we get it to scale, and now it's cheap. So, again, those wheels are starting to turn, things are starting to move in that direction. I think we all kind of see that. But it's, there's a lot that has to happen simultaneously for everyone to win.
I agree. I mean, it's even when we were talking, and I said to Christoph, I said, the work you're doing is amazing and it's revolutionary. And I said, how are you funded? Because when I think about from a venture perspective, and we're thinking about, returns 5 years, maybe we could stretch to 6, 7, and Christoph has been doing this since 2016. And so much of it is going to come down to the entire industry understanding. Alongside of the funding, I was talking to another founder who's developed this amazing system for hair wigs and weaves, and she's using the leaves from a banana plant that you can only get in the rainforest. And the issue there is that she's getting the buy-in, but she's constantly sold out. So the unit economics don't work. The retailers are pulling her off. And it's like, I know you want to be sustainable, but we have to get supply chain figured out, or it's actually disrupting the entire industry. But in order for the supply chain and in order for the products, we need the financing. And so we have to look at how are we capitalizing this so that we can move forward in a circular way. And so it's really all of the different pieces. And I do feel like now, even when we think about venture and the way that money is moving and where we see the opportunity, it is sustainability, because it can't be fast fashion. We also don't want to invest in things that are going to break, that aren't going to work, and that are going to move us further to the other side of economic advancements that we need to do, especially in the US, because Europe is advanced when we think about, even the ban that just passed in California, we were working on the red food ban. All of these things are going to be important. And so it is collectively, each piece has to move together. And it's really the work that you guys are doing that are going to move us along.
Kendra, you've worked with brands from small startups to major global powerhouses. what advice would you give to brands, large and small, who are looking to get this right as the beauty and lifestyle industry navigates a big period of transformation that we've been discussing through this whole panel?
So it's the education, and I don't want to be cliche, but it's a lot of beauty founders are great at their creativity. They understand the products, and this can be in any category, but you have to surround yourselves with the right organizations. Even with the partnership that we're working on with the US Soybean Council to literally come in and work with all of our founders, analyze their ingredients, help them understand what true innovation looks like and what they can do where they are. Because we have founders who want to do better, who want to do right. They don't have the right resources and they're not connected. And so much of it is how do we create ecosystems for winning for these companies to be the genius founders that they are, but to then have the right partners, the right farming, the right resources, the right education to do it right. Because so much of it is I'm going to go out, I'm going to try and get a glass package, I'm going to try and get a soybean product, but I don't understand how to scale it. I don't understand how to finance it. And so then I go backwards or I refill it with an ingredient that's not going to be better, but I'm just trying to keep my product growing. And so we start with the education. We start with the nuance of surrounding ourselves with the right people and making sure that that's going to be our first step in terms of the new products because it's the future. It is the future of what's happening.
I love that. Thank you. For those in the audience that are wondering, how did you get where you got? That was some advice on that. And I loved how you mentioned about collaboration because I'd like you all to hit on that a little bit, right? We know the supply chain is very large. And I think about like my own farm. We have obviously many things going on. We have a direct-to-consumer business. We also have a domestic commodity business where we grow the crops and they go to an elevator that then goes to someone who makes it into a product that will be on a shelf. Well, we're called 8 Plates Farm. There's my mom and dad, there's 6 of us. So, right, we each play a part on the farm, whether it be a small part or a large part, everyone plays a part in that. And when I think of the supply chain that you talked about, it's like everyone needs to play a part in that. Whether we're talking about CPGs, whether we're talking about the sustainability, whether we're talking about the scientists behind it. So can Anne and Christoph and Kendra, you can even chime in again. Can you talk about the collaboration that needs to happen to make a product work?
Yes, I'll start. When we look at all aspects of our global society, including manufacturing, we are on a linear path, right? Linear path in terms of, take, make, and waste. And it's all, we work with the existing ecosystem that already, right? Supply chains already there. Pick up the phone and ask the suppliers that we know, the contract manufacturers that and waste vendors So it's all lined up, right? And when we move to recycle economy, it's there, but it's fragmented. So there's some recycling that's done on certain type of plastic, not all plastic. I talked about the recycled resin that's made by BASF that's now getting uptaken by innovators like Modern Meadow. But we really need to drive towards circular economy. And circular economy, both from the input perspective, manufacturing perspective, and financing perspective, it's not there yet. So I think that the biggest challenge we have is really looking for the collaboration and getting different stakeholders at the table, and not just looking at formulation, but packaging, like the detergent pods now, right? They're talking about the film around it is causing microplastics. So they're in New York State. They're proposing a bill to ban that. And so, if you innovate, let's say detergent with maybe soy-based surfactant, but if you don't think about the film, you don't, right? You're not thinking circular way. So I think the challenge with, the today is education is linear, manufacturing is linear, supply chain is linear, procurement, everything, right? And there's some recycling, but we really need to think about how do we do this circular way, and how do we create this collaboration ecosystem that can drive that change, the transition.
Yeah, I think a lot of what you just said is incredibly important and a big challenge for that. And I think I was a grad student in chemical engineering working on this technology, and had I known the uphill battle I was up against, I don't know if I would have done it. But I think and don't get me wrong, I love doing this, and I think it's there's a lot to be learned and a lot of exciting things that come from this. But it all boils down to, like you said earlier, transparency and traceability, and on top of that, taking ego out of the picture. And I'm not saying like ego on an individual basis, but there's so much in sustainability that only happens when folks win together. And that can be within a company, or that can be between companies, taking IP out of the picture, for example. There are huge opportunities that exist if consumer packaged goods companies and chemical manufacturers just say, look, we're doing this for the greater good, right? We all know we need to be more sustainable, and we're not going to patent around this so that you over there can't do this. And that's kind of starting to take a hold now. There are challenges and consortia that are coming together to address sustainability and safety challenges in the industry that take IP entirely out of the picture. Everyone gets the IP if we solve this problem. Great. That's how we get to scale. And so, it comes down to, can we define what the sustainability goals are? Can we trace them across the supply chain? And then once we figure that out, can we let everyone do it? Because that's, again, how this all works out.
That would be way too easy, though, right, Christoph? Everybody actually wanted to work together. Go ahead, Ian.
It's like,
Yeah,
that's the answer.
Yeah, I can give you one example. The Colgate-Palmolive, I think it took over 10 years to move from, composite film or packaging of toothpaste to monomer, PET based, that's recyclable. It took literally almost a decade to make that transition, and they made it open source, non-IP. But challenge we have is we don't, in US, we don't have the infrastructure or the behavior. So, brands have moved there, right? Colgate and other toothpaste companies may be heading over that direction. But because we don't have the, separation and recycling done that way, how do you ask a recycling center to separate Colgate toothpaste tube from others? That's really challenging. So I think we need to, when you innovate, I think you need to get all different stakeholders that seeking out who do I need to have it at the table to have the discussion, so that at the end of the day we have a holistic sort of the narrative story, even though you're not going to get there from the start, but at a minimum you have all these spaces, right? Kind of touched on.
Yeah, no, that is a very good point, Anne, for sure. And I think it's very solution-based, and I love how you keep using the word circular. What is the whole cycle of that product, and what can we do? Because we all know we may have that one person that comes to the board meeting or some meeting, they don't like something, but they have no solution. And I know, you bring up those problems, but it's you have to think holistically. How are we, what are we going to do to solve that? And I think that's such a great point. Because we look at it, somebody mentioned fragmented. It is. It's a fragmented industry, and we look at it so individually. And sometimes it's we need to look at it as a whole and what is going to work for everyone. So.
And it's interesting, too, because, and just on what you said, but even the state-to-state piece, even when I think about some of the policy work we're doing, so much of it is state to state to state. We've got California, but now we're going into 5 other states, and we're hoping that they can get other ingredients bans that we couldn't get banned in California. And so it's really, and I love there is this notion of if we can all start together and we can work, then we can impact change. But then I also am just asking you too, because when I think about our work going state to state to state, trying to get certain ingredients banned, especially from a color cosmetics perspective and what we're putting on our face, how do we then think about each of the different components, and how do we focus on the piece that's going to unlock all of the pieces in the sphere? I think that's what we're trying to figure out as well.
Yeah, very good point. If anyone knows that secret piece that's hidden somewhere, the puzzle
Please
piece
see
that
me afterwards.
Oh, yeah, exactly. We have had some phenomenal conversation. Thank you. I would love to take some time. We have a little time for questions from the audience. If anyone has questions, there is a microphone in the middle that anyone is welcome to use.
Okay, we're good. Hi. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing. I know it was probably many decades of very unglamorous work that got you on that stage there. I work in textile, and I am self-admittedly myopically focused on what I'm doing right now and what I've learned. Something that is challenging is in textile, there's a lot of talk about circularity, there's a lot of talk about what's healthy, and I think that there's a piece that's very important that's missing from the conversation, and I would love if you can reflect on, and maybe help me with this, but in textile, we never talk about the fact that dye is made from petrochemicals. And most consumers don't know this. And so when we're talking about recyclability in textile, about 1% of textile at the moment is actually recyclable. Polyester is not recyclable. And then even the clothing that is organic cotton is still dyed with petrochemicals, and it's finished with formaldehyde. It's finished with all of these. Organic clothing isn't finished with formaldehyde, but a lot of clothing is. And so there's a lot of confusion, I feel, for consumers to be empowered to be able to support the things we're trying to do. Our brand is here. We were innovators, and so we were presenting because we've created synthetic-free textiles. Nobody really understood what we were doing when we were trying to say we were sustainable, so we switched to saying we're a healthcare company. We actually have gone to the FDA to say, please regulate our textile as a medical device, because people don't understand. When we talk about sustainability, they think we're just talking about the environment, but this is our largest organ. This has a direct impact on us. And so it's made a big shift, but still, so then we took our wastewater and we turned it into skincare to say, look, even our waste is so good, you can make a secondary high-value product out of the waste of our primary high-value product. And it's super exciting for us, but still people aren't quite getting it because now it's so out there. They're like, most people are like, but textiles aren't even toxic. What are you talking about? Like, there's organic clothing. So I'm coming to you to say, please help. I don't really know where to go from here, but you guys seem to have great ideas, and I'd love to know, how do we incorporate health into the conversation so that people don't feel it's just an environmental thing, but rather, like, when this is better for me, it's automatically better for the worker, it's automatically better for the environment.
Can I jump in really quick? Because I think this was a total great segue for something I just took part in with United Soybean Board. Okay. So we had the Nextile competition, and I think this was so cool. We actually sent soy-based fabric, inks, thread, maybe something else, like 4 different types of products that were made with soy, and we had 6 colleges join in this competition. And so we shipped them these products. They were able to create and design a clothing product with soy-based fibers and inks. And I think it was so enlightening to them, because then they took it to an educational standpoint and did a presentation on soybeans. Some of them had never known what a soybean was. And like you just said, to know that it could be made into a clothing product blows so many people's minds. Just like you said, you've tried it for so long, people have no idea. So as a United Soybean member and as a farmer, we are trying to go into colleges just to start the education, like right off the bat, like these are some awesome fibers, and how can we elevate those bio-based materials to the community and to the world out there. I totally see your frustration.
Sorry, yeah, I'm clearly passionate and also just a little Yeah, I appreciate your help.
Although it's so
but I-
exciting because it's like, yes,
Yeah.
we would love to, to be innovators and collaborate with companies like yours. Like that's something we would love to have a conversation about later.
Thank you. I'm just
Yeah.
curious, like, how do we bring health more into the conversation so that it doesn't feel like it's an either or, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really tough challenge, and I think it sounds like what you're doing is really incredible work. So congratulations on that. I think we face maybe an analogous challenge with some of what's done in our industry, the surfactants industry. There's been a lot of discussion around sustainability, but these ingredients that we make, these surfactants, you have the sustainability of the raw materials, the process by which it's made. You actually have the use of the material. So if you wash your laundry, actually 60% of the energy of the entire life cycle is just based on the temperature of the water that you select. And there's a huge messaging challenge in just telling people it's okay to wash your clothes in cold water. It's going to work. But like that's inherently hard for people to do. And getting to things like environmental health, you have to have a chemistry degree to understand this stuff, right? I mean, we have, some of the ingredients in the marketplace today have, potential carcinogens as byproducts in them that have been found in the Hudson River and in drinking water in the state of New York, and they're facing regulation now. But it's a huge messaging challenge to tell a consumer, hey, by the way, the product you're using right now actually has some carcinogens in it, and you need to change. That scares a consumer. They don't want to hear that message, but it's also hard for them to understand how their laundry detergent is ending up in the drinking water that they now have coming up. So, I mean, I don't have a great answer for you, unfortunately, but keep doing that type of work, and I think keep trying to connect the technology and the science behind what you're doing to the impact that it has on our world, because I think people are starting to realize this. I just saw the first TikTok on this carcinogen the other day, so people on TikTok are finally talking about it. So it makes its way into the mainstream, and keep talking about it, and it'll ultimately get there.
And it's interesting. I don't want to do a side, but the interesting thing about the New York water is that New York did a huge campaign about how great their water was, and you could drink it right out of the faucet. And so it goes back to what we've been saying. The reversal of all that they spent to let everyone know that the drinking water was some of the best drinking water in the country, and then you find that out. And so there's this interesting reversal that has to happen in terms of what you said, and the companies and the money. So it's just interesting because we know in the back end of what's really happening there and why we're not going to talk about it because of what's already been said. And one thing that's interesting from a health perspective, right? So a lot of what we talk about is like health and wellness, and being able to connect the pieces between the ingredients, the fabric, eczema, itching. How much are we spending in terms of prescription drugs, all of these things, and all we would actually have to do is change the ingredients that we're ingesting, change the things that we're putting on our skin, which becomes a health situation, right? We think about the ages of people dying, the diseases that have come across because of what we're eating and what we're putting on us. And so I think being able to educate the correlation, Christoph is talking to us about TikTok, like whenever you make those parallels, it is a health issue, because if we can change those things that we're putting on us every single day, then we can decrease the skin swelling, we can decrease the amount of ointments we have to put on, and that becomes a health issue, that becomes a life expectancy issue, and that's when people start to talk about, how do I live longer, how do I feel better, how do I have a healthy life? And so from my background, that becomes marketing, and that becomes how we tell those stories, how we talk about it, and we force the correlation so that it becomes not just an ingredient sustainability. This is about your health, this is about your livelihood, and this is about feeling better. And so that becomes the inherent correlation that you have to make, that you have to tell, and then you have to use all of the channels to tell that story.
And just to add to that, textile haven't been really regulated today, but it's getting regulated, right? EU passed the textile directive under the Green Deal, and there's a circularity directive as well, and plastic treaty is getting finalized end of the year. So I'm hoping that so textile industry as a whole contribute to 10+% greenhouse gas emissions, over 15% water use, and an amazing amount of land use, and etc. So I think we're going to see more regulations coming to textile industry, and come and talk to me afterwards, because I just authored 30-page textile circularity in mobility and beyond to really connect the industries across different sectors. Because when you look at textile, also they're basically 60% polyester and nylon. So yeah, great question. Thank you.
Hi, thank you all for your time. My name's Selena. I am curious about sort of the intersection of the values of product and the packaging they come in. One of the projects I'm working on is in the reuse and refill space. And specifically in the cleaning sector, it's sort of really farther advanced than it is in the food and beverage space, which is where I'm working on it. As far as direct-to-consumer brands having plastic-free packaging models, having reuse models. And so I'm curious about, as you're thinking about, especially Christoph, reducing the use of petrochemicals in the product. How do you think about it as far as packaging, and where do you see that going in the cleaning space?
That's a really great question. There's a lot behind that, and actually this is really something that's front and center of some of the new technology that we're hoping to work on. Again, it's not just the ingredients that we have and how we use them, but it's also how we ship them and how much water are we shipping with them. And water, for example, the ingredient we make conventionally is shipped with 70% water in it. And if you look at a lot of consumer products, a spray cleaner could be 98% water. It doesn't make sense to ship that, right? And so we've seen brands come to life, Blue Land, Grove Collaborative, and so on, doing reusable packaging or concentrates or some other form of this. And to be honest, this is something we're really interested in as well, in actually taking our ingredient, drying it down, and creating powder-based formulations where you can have a little sachet that consumer fills into a reusable bottle, you shake it up, and you have a body wash gel, for example. And you have this, the element of familiarity for consumer in using a body wash gel, but you don't have to ship the water or the plastic with it. I think this has succeeded in the cleaning product space in part because people understand, my window cleaner doesn't need to ship with water, right? That's a very straightforward thing. For food, that's an interesting challenge because, I think I'm from the Pacific Northwest, so I hike a lot, and backpacking food is not foreign to me at all, and I don't have any issue rehydrating my chili and eating it. But to many people, that's pretty weird. Overcoming that challenge is maybe tough, but I think there's a lot of opportunity in the food space for this type of innovation, and I'm excited to see that.
We are out of time for today, so I just want to say thank you so much to our audience. Thank you so much to our panelists. It was a great conversation. And I just want to invite you to our next panel after this because it's involving the entertainment industry and soybean sustainability. It'll be very exciting. Tony, another USB member, will be the mediator, and he will throw many more jokes than me. You should come listen to him. So, yeah. But I want to say thank you so much.